So, I'm going to start with a question. Oh, is everyone, you can swap them around. We're ready to go. Bill, could I ask you a question? This question says, has David Seymour ever described his personal motive for promoting euthanasia, and if so, what has been your answer?
I've never heard him talk about it. I suspect it started out as a marketing exercise for his both members of his ACT party, and but I think as time's gone on, he's taken on a pretty personal approach to it. So you end up with this odd alliance that's pushing the euthanasia legislation, the ACT party, and then a fair chunk of the Labour Party, including too many of their Māori MPs, who are completely opposed to everything that ACT stands for. And the thing that seems to hold them together is that they see this sort of radical autonomous choice as the most important aspect of policy. So in that sense, Jacinda Ardern and David Seymour are much closer now politically than they are to sort of, say, mainstream Conservative Party.
And so can I put the question to you, and I've often heard the example, and the interesting thing is that it's quite close to home, because often there is a family called the Hames family, and the family members all suffered the horrendous disease of Huntington's disease. And it was always used as the example of why we need euthanasia laws, because it's a horrific disease, it has a horrific ending. Now the interesting thing is that my mum and dad both knew the Hames family and, were friends with the mum until her time of death through that Huntington's disease. It wasn't pretty, but we saw the husband just lovingly care for her till the final days. Now, how do you respond to those hard cases when you just think, what's the point of another day? Why not allow that peace? And Mary, you might like to answer this one as well, because that's the hard case that's always put up, isn't it? The Huntington's disease type case?
Yes, it is. I think we've still got the fact that hard cases make for really bad laws. As we saw Professor Rod McLeod say in the video, we can't take away all suffering. It's not possible. And so I can't take away from the tragedy of families with Huntington's, but at the same time, when I look at the injustice that will happen for the disabled, who also suffer significantly, when I look at what's going to happen in terms of young people and an increasing nihilism and resort to suicide. The other thing that we didn't touch on this morning is the number of people who will never consent to dying, who will just quietly be killed. And when I look at all that, and focus on that, I just have to say that actually they count, and this is a really, really bad law. In terms of what we want for people who don't want to be killed but want care, assisted living, the euthanasia laws will make all of that much, much harder. And it will also corrupt the natural ethos of being a doctor.
Okay. Did you want to add to that, Bill? You're good. Okay. Could I put this one to Martyn and also Miranda? And that is that, and look, let me be devil's advocate here. The statement is that, sure, it's okay for people to put scripture online, to quote scripture. But that particular scripture and that particular meme that Israel put online was, and I've seen people call it, tone deaf. It was inflammatory. How have you responded to that? Or are we missing the bigger picture?
I think if you can't talk about your faith like a footballer today, you can't talk about your faith at all tomorrow. That's the issue. Israel's not a wordsmith. He plays footy. He doesn't have a law degree. He's never been in politics. But he has a passion and a faith and a concern. He loves the gospel. He wants to spread the gospel. Tone deaf, well, maybe to a middle class, educated, master's degree bearing, well-to-do church community. But you know what? Izzy grew up in the southern suburbs of Brisbane in the area of Logan, went to Marsden State High and plays football. And there's plenty of guys who he's friends with who respond to the message. And that's just the way different people speak in different places. And so I just completely disagree. I'm not even sure that it was tone deaf. I think it was tone deaf maybe to some people. And even if it were, it's not the point, because there's no other group in society that can't talk freely about what they believe and who they are. And so we should be able to do the same.
Look, it wasn't tone deaf at all. He quoted from Corinthians. He said, Jesus loves you and wants you to repent. He was doing it out of love. And I'll just, as proof of that, I'll give you a preview of this piece that I've written for Sunday. And don't tell anyone because it's a scoop. So don't go tweeting it. So this code of conduct hearing in May before a panel of 3 judges who ended up finding Izzy Folau guilty of a high-level breach. Rachael Castle, the head of Rugby Australia, was asked by John West QC, who was the chairman. He asked her, what if Mr. Folau had photocopied passages from the Bible and simply posted that on his social media pages? Would that have caused a problem for you? Rachael Castle replied, I think it depends on which ones, which pages he photocopied. So West asked again. He said, if he'd photocopied the passages that are referred to in the posts, would that have caused a problem for you? And Rachael Castle replied, yes, it would have. So in other words, it wasn't tone deaf, it was just the Bible. He quoted the Bible, and the Bible, Rachael Castle has just declared, is hate speech. And that's just not a feasible situation to have.
Marijke, I want to raise this issue because you talked about the fact that you ended up in big trouble because you posted on your social media and people commented on your social media and you effectively got legal action taken against you because of what other people had said primarily. Now, I know that when we had the discussion on the phone a couple of weeks ago about this, you know what the first thing I did was I went to our social media and started checking comments because there are some nutbars on our pages. We can't avoid them. They troll and they come looking, and unfortunately some of them are our supporters. You can't avoid that, can you? Now, so I wasn't talking about anybody in this room. But I know that guy Elliot, he posts some pretty radical stuff on his page. So, I mean, there's a bit of a warning here about this whole social media thing, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I did mention, it wasn't a free speech issue. It was actually defamation by law. The way social media does work is that if you make a post, you are responsible for not only what you say, but everything underneath. And this is the law based on... the law that I was told about was basically a secretary in a cricket club who had responsibility for the notice board. Another member of the cricket club came along, posted something defamatory about another member of that club, and the secretary didn't remove it. Excuse me. So where this gets really tricky, though, is that obviously the person who wants to take litigation against you could sue Facebook. They have paid moderators to remove these comments. They also have the choice to sue the person making the comments, or they could sue me as the publisher, which is what happened. So the best situation for me was to go into some mediation in that situation. But it is absolutely a warning shot, because I'm a mummy blogger. I'm not paid to do what I do. I literally would go on Facebook, I'd have a spray, and then I'd go and cook dinner. And I'd, I guess underestimating that this is the times we're in, and there were people watching. It was a post from 18 months ago that had gone dead, and I'd missed the comment, and it was actually just a series of comments. So there was a number that, if put together, and the imputation was that I'd defamed the individual. That was the problem. But it is a warning shot because, we do need to be careful not to defame people, and I think those laws have to be in place. But at the same time, these are the times we're in, and it has caused a stir that people finding out that this has happened to me. Well, it can happen to all of you.
But obviously you've got a target on your back, haven't you, because you've spoken up?
Very much so.
I mean, they're not going through comment pages of Joe Blogs and fourth row seat 4 in, are they? They're going after the people that are...
It's because Marijke has been so influential and so important that they obviously targeted her, and they have scoured everything she's ever written. They couldn't ever find anything bigoted or xenophobic or homophobic or all those phobes. And so they had to get her through this obscure legal avenue.
So, Martyn, you're the lawyer. What's your advice to us in terms of this? I mean, it's pretty dangerous.
Well, we've had exactly the same thing. ACL, the Human Rights Commission, for comments that other people put on our Facebook page. And this was on posts with thousands of comments, and you just couldn't find them, let alone delete them. And we do have an automatic filter on our Facebook. There's some software you can get that does that. So we've done that. So obscenity and gross pictures and things are automatically filtered out. But unless we hire 20 staff to read and filter every single comment that goes on Facebook, this is a risk that we now bear. Fortunately, well, for defamation, that's a real challenge because the financial implications are huge. But for us, it was a Human Rights Commission thing, and usually the legal implications of that aren't so weighty. There's not huge amounts of money involved, but it is a risk that we bear now. And I think what I'd like to see is that if any such case comes up and there's an opportunity to take it to court and ventilate that question of whether or not someone else's comment on a Facebook page is in fact therefore your responsibility as the publisher. I'd like to see that tested again. The only authority we have for it in Australia is a very low-level tribunal decision. There's nothing above that. So we're waiting for an opportunity. But in the meantime, that tribunal decision is doing its work, and it's a risk we bear.
Bill, you've been a politician since 1990, so perhaps you can help us understand a little bit of the mindset of David Seymour's bill. It went through a select committee. There were 38,000 submissions, the biggest ever. 90+% of them were against, but most importantly, 90% of medical professionals were against it, the ones who have to administer the effect of this law. So who are politicians listening to?
Well, a lot of them are reflecting on experiences of their own or someone they know. And it seems to me that in this sense they're a bit like the public, that a fundamental driver for them is their negative experience of someone's death. And given, the death's often from old age or disease, it's got its element of suffering and pain. And then there's this sort of quite simplistic jump from there that says, well, I could use my vote to take that away. And that's about it. Now, I'm a bit optimistic about it in this sense that even the mainstream media have been reporting the issue quite seriously in about the last month, rather than just assuming everyone wants this, only religious nutters are opposed to it. They actually are staying. It's a reasonably complex issue, and some of the material, such as you saw in the video, a lot of the work of the disability community, 1,000 doctors say no, that's having an impact. And so in New Zealand, the debate has been distinctively not religious. It's been distinctively practical. What are the risks here and do the rules work? And how dangerous might it be? So some of the politicians have changed their mind. We have now got a number of months during which more could and should. Things like the Pacific Wave are very promising, because I think the bit that would shift it now, I think, is New Zealand First and Labour, who have among their voters quite a lot of socially conservative people who don't like this stuff. So while the MPs can be pushed around in Parliament by the progressivist Prime Minister, their voters can't and won't. And it's really important that they start expressing that view to their own representatives. It's certainly got to happen more in the National Party. But that's the bit where the government could misjudge it. That, if you get into next year and you've got marijuana, abortion and euthanasia all there or just about there, there are numbers of the Pacific community, some of the Māori community, and certainly the diminishing number of good, decent, old-style Labour people who will be pretty worked up about what that's doing to their country. So we've got to get those people activated, and your work here is so important in helping with that.
Miranda, and I'm probably echoing exactly what Garth would ask you as a question, Garth McVicker, and that is, are you the only Conservative in the whole of media in New Zealand and Australia? Because we haven't found anyone yet, which is why I invited you here, just to prove to people that they exist. But, are you the only one?
No, look, that's really flattering that you say that. But no, there's quite a few. And I'm actually noticing some younger reporters are coming on stream who are actually instinctively conservative and not afraid, in social terms, and not afraid to say it. And I put that down, I think, in part to Jordan Peterson. His influence on young reporters in our newsroom now has been quite profound, where they're not, I'm used to, say, I did a story a while ago about the sort of transgender nuttiness that's in our military now, and where they've got gender-neutral training manuals, and where actually they have such political correctness that's crept in that now they're training their fighter pilots to make sure that it's not women who use a bridge that they're going to blow up for some reason. So all this craziness is going on, and so I write a story, and a young reporter's been asked to follow up on it, and I thought, oh, here we go, I have to explain it and try and explain I'm not a, transphobe. And he got it straight away. And he would be in his sort of mid-20s, and then he went on Sky News and he defended it. And he was really articulate, and he really believed in it. And I thought, wow. And I thought it must be a Jordan Peterson fan. I asked him, and he loves Jordan Peterson, was reading 12 Rules for Life. So I think there's hope. Young people are hungry for meaning, even in the media, and they see the baby boomers, that whole generation of sort of who comprise most of the media, they see them as washed up, conservative in a funny way, like establishment people, and the baby boomers expect the young journalists to be like they were when they were young and sort of radicals, but actually being countercultural, being radical now means that you're conservative. And so I think the media landscape is improving enormously, and particularly because the competition from, other sources of media is making newspapers and media outlets wake up and say, oh, we need to have a chunk of that. It's just for business reasons, but we want some of that conservative audience. And it was really why I was poached in the first place to go to Fairfax, because they wanted my people who read me, they understand now, and the Izzy Folau thing is an example that there is a big constituency there. They're not noisy, but they buy papers, they subscribe to media, and they buy subscriptions to television. So they're important. And I think that's why the people in this room, vote with your feet. Vote for read the newspapers, buy the newspapers, and watch the television programs where if there are conservative people, write to the conservative commentators and say, I love what you do, because it's the only thing that keeps your head up, that makes you realise that you're not in a Fruit Loop and you're not out on a limb and you're not a nutcase and you're not evil, is that the audience tells you that they're right with you.
Mary, could we just talk about the rights of doctors? Look, there's a couple of things around here. Firstly, just concerns of doctors around euthanasia, but also could we touch on abortion as well, the rights of doctors to not have to perform abortions? But also there was the issue raised earlier in the day about the example of a nurse in a surgical theatre of whether they had to be present in a transgender operation, which they conscientiously objected to. The Health Professional Alliance has worked about giving doctors conscientious rights. Does that extend to all medical professionals? So there's a few questions in there, sorry.
Yeah. I think the proposed changes for the abortion laws overlap and have the same issues for doctors as the proposed changes in euthanasia laws. And in terms of the nurse, unless there's a conscientious clause, which under the Contraception, Sterilisation and Abortion Act there was, and in the, what was the other Act, Bill, that had a particular, there was another way too that doctors could be protected. Unless the nurses, I don't think they'll have that. It will come down to what's in the contract. But in terms of the problem for doctors is that they are absolutely happy. I mean, David Sewell loves standing there and saying, we're not going to make doctors do this, and that's true. But they will make us refer our patients, which means that, again, patients will set out to ask us, and some of them will absolutely make sure they do. What's happened in Canada is that the doctors are being absolutely trolled and targeted, and it's systematic. It's not random. It's people setting out to do it. So that the Voluntary Euthanasia Society people have OIA'd, Official Information Acted, the doctors, and as the doctors. They're contracted providers, and in Canada all the medical health is pretty much public, but it's meant that the police can turn up at your house at any time of the day or night and demand your laptop and take it away, and you don't know when you're going to get it back. And for a lot of those doctors who might be lecturers presenting cases or lecturing at presenting at a conference, a medical conference, they've lost their information and they don't know when they're going to get it back. So a lot of them are having to resort to, using the private email. So I think what this makes it very clear to us all is that we have to be quite street smart. We really have to be quite street smart. And a lot of people who have been, come from normal white middle class households, that hasn't been necessary. If you've grown up in a rough neighbourhood, and there's been a few things going on that you have to, be aware of danger, you might get this a bit more, but, from a lot of people, they don't or they can't. In terms of, as I said earlier on, with having to refer, they can get us because the guidelines that will come out from the Medical Council will say, we won't register you as a doctor. You won't get your driver's licence for being a doctor if you don't fulfil the guidelines. So that goes under the radar. There's no sort of, they made me do it, they made me murder my patient. It's procedural. It's the traffic officer gotcha approach to making people suffer. And for using the law at the minor level. So that's where they'll set out to get the doctors. But at the same time, we really need to undertake a freedom of conscience rights campaign, because it's really, really important that doctors actually can advocate for their patients, for our patients. It's really, really important that we can say, well, we have to stand here. We can't turn a blind eye to our patients being abused. We can't turn a blind eye to the fact that the patient didn't nominate anybody who was picking on them, but guess what? At their home, that person had terrorised them into declaring that nobody was picking on them. What happens when we're doctors is that other members of the family ring up. I cannot say anything about their mother or their father because I don't have the consent of that patient. But currently, we are very free, and what we say to those people is, I will listen to you. So you can imagine doctors will have the burden of getting the story of what's really happening inside the household, but the way the law is drafted, if that person or those people haven't been nominated by the patient as, these are the relatives who you can, go to and get the lowdown on whether I'm being picked on or not, then I can't act on it. So it's going to be a real burden of suffering because, when you can't unknow it, but at the same time, there's nothing you can do to stop it. We've got a situation in Canada where doctors who are expert in delirium, which means that you're really unwell, you're so unwell that your mental judgment is clouded, they've said to the physicians, well, this patient cannot be allowed to make or sign anything to do with euthanasia because they don't have capacity. So therefore they can't freely and knowingly consent. And they've just been overridden. They've been overridden. So, at the end of the day, it does become a conveyor belt. I was just shocked when I read the stuff that was coming out of Canada. I just realised, oh my goodness, this is terrible. And actually, we are all vulnerable in this room. We are really all vulnerable. And so are our children and our grandchildren. So I think that it's very, very important to actually wake up and start to ask questions. You'll have to ask your own doctors, well, what's your view? You might need to know.
Bob, just to follow up there. So in Canada, it's starting to get coercive because they're getting fewer doctors doing it, so they want to try and make it that everyone does it. But another thing that's turned up there is compulsion on organisations. So how it actually works there is if you're a hospice, and they're all publicly funded, and here they all get public funds, as a condition of public funds, hospices will have to provide euthanasia. And I was telling a group in Tauranga this, and you could just see the shock on the faces of these wonderful people who work there when they realise that in one room they'll be trying to work with a family to deal with the issues around dying, and in the next room their colleague will be killing someone. So and of course hospice is starting to worry about what that's going to do to their brand.
Rachael, time for a question. We were letting you have a rest after your presentation.
Thanks, Bob.
The latest Gallup poll, which I saw over the weekend, which is the major one in the US, and I think it was Gallup, was said around the issue of abortion that the younger generation are becoming more pro-life. So younger people that you're closer in age to than I am, are more pro-life than they are pro-abortion. Does that surprise you? And why do you think that is?
I don't think it surprises me. I think we definitely are seeing that, particularly in the US. I think it's still yet to trickle down to places like New Zealand and Australia. We're getting there, but culturally we're not quite at the same place as they are yet with the pro-life issue, with the abortion issue. I think that it's Not surprising in the sense, kind of going back to a little bit, I guess, what Miranda mentioned before in relation to Jordan Peterson. People are looking for meaning and for truth, and when they are presented with the other side of this issue, then it resonates with them. Before, over the last few years, they weren't hearing that side as much, and I think with the pro-life movement especially growing in the US, that information's coming out a lot more. So you're seeing a lot more on social media, you're seeing a lot with things like the March for Life, you're seeing, images, you're seeing the positive stories about women who have continued with their pregnancies, and you're seeing obviously all the bad sort of stuff come out as well. But you're seeing that, I think social media has played a huge part in getting the truth out there. I think not surprising in the sense that in some way, even though a big part of our culture is still very relativistic, still very PC, there's another part which is becoming more truth-seeking and becoming more focused on meaning and that sort of thing. So I think, in a certain sense, it's not surprising.
Yeah. And I mean, Mary, that's the part I don't understand, is that previously with abortion we were able to persuade ourselves that it was just a clump of cells and that it wasn't a human being. But as we saw on that promo for the March for Life in December, Gordon grabbed footage of the clearest ultrasound of an unborn child in existence at the moment. It's doing the rounds on social media. I mean, it is so clear. And so it's hard for us to, therefore, justify that this isn't a human being. So if the medical profession is able to understand that and reveal that to us, how can we still justify abortion? That it's not a life?
Well, I think the mind can do all sorts of things, and there's a big thing called denial, where you deny the truth of the humanity because for whatever reason. It could be because you're under duress or you've been coerced, or it could simply be because it suits you not to see it. It absolutely suits you not to see it. And I think there's a fair bit of that goes on, but it was easier for the unborn child to be the victim because they were invisible. With euthanasia, the victims are very much visible, but it's going to be exactly the same thinking. This person, and they sort of truss it up in terms of autonomy and choice, but at the end of the day, it just says, well, some people you can kill.
We're almost out of time, and to finish with, I'm going to give each one of you 60 seconds to inspire our 350 delegates to go away with something to take as inspiration. But before we do that, so you can think about it, that was just warning, because I've been taught to give my kids a 5-minute warning. Martyn, why did you stop at 2.2 million?
Well, because I thought that was more than enough money. So part of the deal that we did with the lawyers, when we drafted up a little deed of agreement that we had to do about the fundraising page, I just said to them, look, I do think 3 million is pretty insane. And given that my name is now on this, given I now have to defend this in the public square, I'm going to be called to account on this, I feel more comfortable if we actually drop it back to 2 million, which I think is heaps for several years. And if we need more money, we'll go back to the donors if and when the time comes. And I'm sure that we will raise more money. And so I just did that as a sort of an integrity thing, but we couldn't apply the brakes fast enough. It was like, the car had got too much inertia and we're just going to go over the cliff. Because I said, stop, we're going to hit 2 mil. We blasted straight through 2 mil. And just in the time it took to sort the logistics out to pause the page, we hit 2.2. So, that's why we ended up with 2.2.
And look, I have heard the story because we've talked about it, but just tell us, or tell the delegates, how did the media change in the way they treated you over those 3 to 4 days?
Oh, radically. I mean, I'll give you one example. So was David Koch, who is Koshi, the Sunrise host, who has a reputation for causing trouble for people he doesn't like. And the first time I went on Sunrise, it's kind of like, who's this new fresh-faced kid on the block? We'll knock him off his perch pretty quick, come on. And I sat down in the seat, and he just was obnoxious and rude and trying to distract me and doing all sorts of things that you couldn't see because there was overlay images on the screen and stuff. And so he was sort of leering into me and, taking sharp intakes of breath as if he was going to cut me off and just confusing me. Anyway, got through that, did okay and finished that interview. And I walked out thinking, man, he's a jerk. But then I got a phone call later that day, once we had raised an absolute fortune and the outpouring of support was really gaining traction. And they said, we want you back on Sunrise. And I thought, what, to be bashed again? All right, no worries. And so I decided to go on again 2 mornings later when we had just paused the fundraiser. And what happened the second time was they sent a limo around to my hotel to pick me up. They fed me breakfast in the studio, and I'm pretty sure everyone down to the security guard on the door had been briefed, because it was like, welcome back, Mr. Iles, so wonderful to have you, please come on through. And I thought, well, this is different. And I sat down to be interviewed, and it was the softest, and he was agreeing with me and nodding his head and gave me a few Dorothy Dixes in there. It was really astonishing. And I thought, this guy's been walloped by his viewers and his producer. And he's got me back. Same thing for the Today Show. The lady who was mean to me the first time, they sort of hid her out of view, and I got interviewed by the other one who was all friends, asking me about my clothes, telling me about, it was ridiculous. So unbelievable change when they realise, hang on, something's going on here. And that's the value of people joining together to speak up. It has a massive impact.
And Miranda, I think because you're one of the guilty ones, being part of the media, is that the perception is that originally when we read media, when we read newspapers, we would get both sides of the debate and we would draw our own conclusions. We felt that reporters would go off and find the contrary voice. I don't see a lot of evidence of that. I read a lot of articles that basically have a straight-out agenda, and that is to persuade me to believe something, or go and find someone they disagree with and completely blast them. Am I not seeing everything? I mean, is that the way they think in newsrooms, that they should be telling us how to think?
Look, in some cases, I think what's happened is, sorry, I got so relaxed that I forgot about the microphone. I think, look, since I've been in journalism, at the beginning there were no columnists in the newspapers to speak of. There was not opinion. Now I think opinion sells, and so it's just invaded all the news pages. It's become, everyone wants to write a column, and at the same time, where it used to be that it would be journalists who would write opinion or give opinion, and they had some sort of ability to gather news, and they had that sort of instinct to look at both sides and then just present one, but at least they were gathering the truth. Increasingly, because opinion has been so successful, you just have, people who don't care about the truth. They're propaganda merchants, and their opinions are put up against, truthful opinions, and there's no difference. And so I think that's infected the news media. And so even though journalism, still there are journalists who are trained and who I work with and who do, and at opposing newspapers, the Sydney Morning Herald and so on, who do try to practice the craft, which is offering both sides of the story and just being truthful. That's all our duty is supposed to be to the public, to our readers, to our audience. They're being sort of drowned out. And then the criticism against them is that if the public is so used to having their own prejudices being reinforced, that then if a reporter is being honest and is just presenting the truth, they're abused from both sides, from the left and the right, as being biased when they're not being. So that disincentivises them to actually do what they're supposed to do and present the news. So I think the way to stop that happening is to actually, for the public to appreciate, even if you read a story that doesn't accord with your worldview, at least be appreciative of the fact that they try, that, you know, the other side has been also given an airing.
Let's finish. Word of encouragement, something to inspire us, something to give us delegates something to think about. Mary, can I start with you?
I was hoping you were going to start at the other end. And I just say, well, they've said it all. I just think, especially listening to you, Marijke, today, you either stand for something or you fall for everything. And that applies to everybody. Because it's New Zealand and this is the home of the Lord of the Rings, I like going back to stories. I think they have good messages, and the one thing about the Lord of the Rings is it wasn't the fastest, the strongest, the most elvish with all the magic who in the end saved the day and destroyed the ring. It was the weakest and most flawed. Who can remember who it was? Gollum. That's right, it was Gollum. So what I've learnt from being in politics is that sometimes things happen and it's not the most important person with the biggest title or the biggest amount of money. Actually, sometimes it's just the very ordinary, brave person who takes a stand.
Thank you. Rachael?
I guess just adding on to that, the whole taking a stand and just really trying. I've met so many incredible people, especially in the pro-life movement in Australia, who have taken a stand and who are making great changes in relation to abortion. People like Jaya who are speaking out about abortion coercion, mothers of who have been, pressured to have terminations, who are speaking out and making changes in policies in places like Tasmania and so on. But I think what's really important when you stand up is to do it with compassion, which these people have done, and I guess trying to meet people where they're at. And I think if we do that, then we can make a lot of difference, and we can see issues like abortion become unthinkable in our lifetimes. I guess I see a lot of hope for the future, especially in terms of the people that I've been working with in Australia. So.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay.
Okay, rabble-rousing, this is my favourite thing to do. So many years ago, a group of people wanted to change society, and they knew that in order to do that, they had to be organised and they had to activate. And it was called the Long March Through the Institutions. And they knew that if they wanted to get to a stage where we could kill babies full term with no pain relief and no conscientious objection, as we have in Victoria and around the world, and if we could remove marriage as the sacred union of a man and a woman, if we could, kill people on their deathbed and call it euthanasia, they had to actually get organised and activate, and they had to change society and culture, and so they did. And so they got busy and they got into political parties, and you can see all over the world they have a stronger voice. They got into the media, hence why we've got brave soldiers who stand a lot of the time on their own because they've been outnumbered. It's happened through the media, where I can't think of a fantastic family values television show currently on in Australia at all. And so my message to you is sometimes pendulums swing back, but more often than not you have to push them back. And so I would encourage everybody to think about how you can organise and activate. I've been involved in some of that in Australia, and I won't go into too many details as I think we're being recorded, but basically if enough Conservatives get involved in a party, you can actually topple Prime Ministers. The vote 10 years ago, that happened on the abortion bill 11 years ago in Victoria. That was one person in Parliament, one person. And when I realised that, I had no idea how politics work, but when I realised that, I thought, you know what? There's got to be two more of us. And it's as simple as that. So that's my encouragement for you today. Think about how you can activate and organise and actually, it's going to take a long time. I mean, when I get disheartened, I've got this wonderful friend who says, come on. I'm like, I'm giving it up. I can't do it anymore. And she says, but remember William Wilberforce. He went back to that parliament again and again and again and again and again. And, what's the alternative?
I just have to praise Marijke because she's been had an enormous impact on the Safe Schools legislation and activated parents and got them to understand, mums like her, just how insidious this was, and she played a big role in having that legislation rolled back. But look, I think I echo everyone else on the panel so far into really saying to all of you here that there are negatives about social media, or enormous negatives that have terrible impact on our children and on our culture. But there are also, it's a great potential force for good because it has democratised the news. Each one of you has a big impact in the way that news is delivered and what kind of news is chosen and which writers and which commentators and which TV stars are promoted. And that's because the audience now is counted individually. Every one of your clicks, every time you share a story on Facebook, or reward or write to someone who you like, who's writing or whose stories you like on television or on YouTube, just like with Jordan Peterson, your votes count and you have so much power. You don't even realise how much power each one of you has in terms of shaping this new media environment. So it's not very hard. You just reward the Conservatives and you punish the other side by just ignoring them, by not sharing them, by not commenting on them. I was just saying to Martyn, there's a German word which I won't pronounce properly, but it's something like Totschweich tactic, and it means death by silence. It is used by the left against Conservatives. Martyn will be interviewed at length, he told me, on 60 Minutes for an hour, and they didn't put a word of it to air because, of course, he was so compelling that it was going to hurt their agenda and didn't fit their narrative. I've experienced the same sort of thing. But you can pay them back too. You can give the lefties zero oxygen, and that's what they hate. So you can shape the media one by one.
Good.
Numbers count. And often these issues are just won by the people who are better organised with bigger numbers. And as a politician, why do they count? Because that's what amounts to pressure. Two things, number and degree of conviction. And I have seen examples of, like Marijke, a person who decides the world's going to change, who's completely unreasonable. And even though there's only one of them, they end up changing the world. Because eventually they persuade someone somewhere. So my advice is follow Bob's action points. Because every time you do one thing like that, we've had this discussion about euthanasia. Should people be emailing MPs when they won't read emails? No, they won't, but they'll count them. And if there's 2, they know it doesn't matter. And if there's 200, they know it matters. And it's that quick, right? Someone just said to them, how many emails did I get last week? I got 300. Whoa. How many emails did I get last week? I got 2. Right? And they didn't even read the 2. So that's where your part can be so powerful. Just follow the action points, because how often have you sat through discussions with no action points? No one actually did it. And if 5 people do it, and a beautiful example I've seen of that is the work that Mary and her 2 friends did on just 3 of them, and they ended up getting 1,170 doctors to publicly say they oppose euthanasia.
Wow, I'll get the last word. Gee. Look, a number of bases have been covered for me already, actually, and I particularly agree with what Bill said about numbers and degree of conviction. I get meetings with politicians now because I say we have 1,500 supporters in your electorate, and there's no politician that's going to say no to that meeting. So, you know, that is important. Band together, be convicted. I thought maybe, given the bases that are covered, I'll say one other thing. And this relates to a question I get very often, which is, what about young people? And something very strange is happening in the West at the moment. And it's something that Miranda touched on just a moment ago. And that is that young people, people under 35, especially people under 30, are very, very hungry. They're very, very hungry for truth and meaning. And there are people out there who are giving it to them. And those people are becoming rock stars amongst that population group. Dr. Jordan Peterson is a key example because he speaks as one who understands their world. And having found one who understands their world, he then lays down the truth and gives them meaning. And it's like catnip because they have grown up in a time and in a framework where they're told they can be anything, they can do anything. Self is the only governing principle for life. All they need to do is be true to self and to go anywhere and so on. And this is the way, they've been brought up because their parents grew up in a time when the structures and authority and all the rest of it was being cast off. And now these guys have grown up with none and they're desperate for some. And if you come along, I would say, dealing with young people, the number one question that they're looking to solve is authority. Authority. They want that truth, they want that meaning, they want authority figures, they want to see conviction. And do you know what? I keep on saying, if Jordan Peterson's doing it, why aren't Christian people doing it? There's so much opportunity, and we just need to stop being scared of our convictions and being scared of all that we believe from the foundation upwards. And I think declaring that anew in this generation will yield tremendous fruits. Paul said in Romans, I'm not ashamed. Why wouldn't he just say I'm proud of it? Because our impulse is to be ashamed. And young people will look at an ashamed generation and they'll spit on them and turn away. But if they look at a generation that is not only filled with authority, convicted by truth, and is declaring it to them in their time, they'll follow it. So there's a strange thing going on, and I'd say don't be disappointed, just seize the opportunity.
Would you thank all our speakers, please? We've been very spoiled today. Thank you very much.